Hi, Kevin Coupe here, and this is FaceTime with the Content Guy. You know, this week marks the anniversary of two major technological breakthroughs. One I think is a lot more top of mind than the other because it happened a lot more recently. But the other I think is no less significant. In fact, you could argue maybe it's even more so. The more recent one, of course, is the iPod. It was 10 years ago this week that the iPod first became available for sale and totally changed the balance of power in terms of the music industry, right? I mean, until that point, the music industry, whether it was retailers or manufacturers, they were the ones who dictated how we were going to get our music, in what form, and how we were going to listen to it. They were going to create the albums. They were going to talk about the order in which we were going to listen to songs. It didn't matter whether the albums were vinyl or tape or CD. They were the ones, to a great extent, who were going to determine that. With the advent of the iPod and iTunes, right, we could decide to buy things by the song. We could create our own albums, our own playlists. We could mix and match music types. We can mix and match artists. And artists, they didn't even need the traditional music industry to get to the ultimate consumer. They could go around them. They could get their own songs on the internet. We could download them to our iPods and listen to them. It changed the world in terms of the music industry. It also had enormous competitive impact, right? Before that, it was Sony that really dominated the way we all listened to music with the Walkman series. Not so much anymore. I'm not sure Sony's been the same company, at least in that side of it, since the time of the iPod. And speaking of competition, has anybody bought a Zune lately? I don't think so. The other change that I think is equally, if not more significant, happened a lot longer ago. It happened 150 years ago. It was a century and a half ago that the first Transcontinental Telegraph was completed, and people were able to send messages almost instantaneously from California to Washington, D.C. That was an enormous achievement, and I think in a lot of ways it created the foundation for consumer expectations that persists and grows even to this day. Do you know that before the Transcontinental Telegraph was completed, the Pony Express would brag that it could get a letter from Missouri to California in under 2 weeks. Okay, and I'm sure that once the telegraph was completed, people would look at that and say, "Oh, that's so 17th century." You know, it just changed everything. And in fact, and this is maybe a coincidence, but do you know the Pony Express went out of business on the same day that the Transcontinental Telegraph was completed? That's a lesson the U.S. Postal Service perhaps should learn, but hasn't. Sometimes we forget that the marvels of today are built in so many ways on the marvels of the past. I'm sure in 1861, when people heard about the Transcontinental Telegraph, they were as amazed by that as people today are by the iPhone 4S. In fact, maybe more so, because their expectations were lower. Now, one other thought, if I may. It is worth noting that when the Transcontinental Telegraph was completed, it happened just months after the beginning of the Civil War. The Civil War was raging, and what happened was it created a situation in which East and West were connected at a time when North and South were rupturing. They were rupturing. It was a horrible time for this country, and yet, think of the moment of progress that happened with the creation and completion of the Transcontinental Telegraph. I think that's a great kind of moral lesson for us today. And that even at times when you think things are bad, progress can be made. It's within the American character to make progress even in tough times, maybe because of tough times. And we have to hope and pray and act on the premise that it is within the American character today to do the same thing. Even when times are tough, we can continue to move forward. Anyway, that's what's on my mind this Thursday morning, and as always, I want to hear what's on your mind.